Man, it's been a while since I've been here, huh? Nearly 3 full years. Where does the time go? And in that time, I haven't even talked about anything Mario related. I've really gotta get to fixing that. Luigi's Mansion is a game I sung the praises of back in the day, and I've still gone back to the game multiple times since then. Honestly, for being a 2021 video of mine, this is one of the better videos I did that year, even though I have still considered going back for a redo, and actually talking about the remake this time. We can look back another day though, because right now we're moving forward. Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, the sequel of the GameCube original that came out 12 whole years after working for the 3DS even. Part of the renowned Year of Luigi in the same way that wars are renowned. It wasn't so bad. We got this game in Dream Team. Dr. Luigi. Yeah, it didn't go well. Dark Moon was the first Luigi's Mansion game I played, mainly because buying GameCube games wasn't especially easy for me growing up in the Wii era, so it's not like there was a lot of wiggle room there. Here's something kinda surprising though, I got Dark Moon the year it came out, played it a ton as a kid, haven't done a full playthrough of it since 2013. I've gone back to it a decent number of times, but it was mainly doing extra stuff like getting all the booze, gems, and a lot of the ScareScraper. I think the closest I got to doing another playthrough was in 2018-ish, where I dropped the game at the 4th mansion, and I don't remember why. But then, June of last year, a Nintendo Direct announced a remaster of the game for Switch, and this is nothing special, but on a personal level, thank God. Time for me to be completely and totally transparent, I don't really have a way of recording this game because 3DS games on my computer, through entirely legal means, please move the sniper rifle away from my head, gets real wacky sometimes, and while most games work fine, others are a mess, and unfortunately for me, Dark Moon is one of those. No matter how hard I tried, it just wouldn't stop being annoying, and if not for that, I would have had this video done years ago. My only other option is a capture card, which ain't much of an option, because not only are they hard to get, because only one guy does it from what I've seen, but they're also a bit expensive for me. Let's get this out of the way. This remaster that's being sold and marketed as a remake, by the way, but I'm not calling it that. It isn't anything crazy, especially even compared to the remake of the first game on 3DS. They didn't add anything to the game besides changing the title of the European version for, I imagine, consistency reasons. And while the graphics did see a boost and is definitely better looking than the 3DS original, more still could have been done, because the game still feels behind the standard Luigi's Mansion 3 set. It does feel kinda lazy, as the only value you're getting out of the remaster is literally just the fact you don't have to play it on an outdated console, which I know is enough for some people, especially if they haven't played it already. That being said, I'm in the unique position I just described, so regardless, this game has value to me specifically, so beauty truly is in the eye of the beholder, and baby, I need glasses. From what I understand, Dark Moon is the odd man out. The original and 3 have gotten a lot of praise from fans, but this is the only Mansion game as of right now that people are a bit more split on, seeing as it's been around 10 actual years since I've gone from start to finish with this one. Most of the problems I know of this game have been through word of mouth, so I'm hoping this revisit will give me something that happily surprises me. We're dropped in a whole new location, Evershade Valley, where Egad has set up shop with the assistance of these ghosts, which surely won't blow up in his face. 3, 2, 1, King Boo shows up and destroys the Dark Moon in the sky that was keeping the ghosts docile, and they immediately start wreaking havoc. Egad then immediately calls upon Luigi, who's sleeping in his house that looks like the D-rank mansion from the first game. That's a nice callback, guess someone wasn't watering his plants. And now it's a journey through 5 new mansions to gather pieces of the Dark Moon so that Egad can get employees who don't even have the option of unionizing. Immediately, we get dumped in front of the first mansion, and things feel similar and different. Important bit of context, back on the 3DS, since there wasn't a second stick to move your vacuum with, there were buttons assigned to looking up and down. It worked better than it sounds, I'll give it that, but the remaster gives you the option to use the right stick, and it feels much more natural. A lot of the differences in the gameplay involve new trinkets to play with, most notably is the strobe bulb. You don't stun ghosts with the flashlight on its own anymore, instead you charge up this giant blast of light to try and grab them. It's a different feel from the first games. I did like how there was a certain sense of strategy and flow using the original light, but if you didn't get to grips with it, things could get pretty annoying. The new version is much more consistent and makes it a lot easier to grab multiple ghosts in a single suck, which rarely happened in the original. The action of sucking up ghosts is also pretty different. In the original game, wrangling in ghosts felt like roping in a wild animal. You need to be constantly changing what direction you're pulling in. The ghost would actively be dragging you around the room in an effort to break free, but But Dark Moon can't really do that is the thing. The 3DS has a circle pad which can't take as much abuse as a conventional stick. You should see what the Smash Bros guys were doing at these things. Instead, it's more so about holding the opposite direction from where the ghost is going, and even though I understand why it was made this way, man, is it way less interesting and fun. The game does have a compromise for this though. The further you get, the larger groups of ghosts they'll start throwing at you, far more than the first game will have you deal with. Coupled with the flash allowing you to grab up to 4 ghosts with good positioning, now it becomes an actual challenge to wrangle them in, since there's multiple directions you need to be pulling in at the same time, which gives it a similar feel to the first game. There's also the Dark Light. A few levels into the game, boos start showing up, turning objects invisible. The Dark Light allows you to rematerialize these objects, which can lead to some really fun puzzle solving sometimes. There can be fun moments where you gotta analyze your surroundings and make an actually informed decision on where the Dark Light needs to be used. And then there's this. Why even make the door invisible at that point, man? What else is gonna be there? Due to the game being really linear, there's also the inherent problem of if you can't figure out what's needed for the Dark Light, there's nothing stopping you from flashing it around the room until you find something. There's one problem with some of these mechanics though, they need to be upgraded, and coming off my last experience with Dark Moon being the post-game, it was a bit annoying going back. The Dark Light has a meter for how long you can use it, which makes catching boos a chore, more on that later. The Poltergust also has a meter, it's for when you're sucking. After a bit of pulling back, you can do a big suck. And the more upgrades you get, the more levels of super suck you can do for enemies with larger amounts of health. I'm not sure why they make you do these upgrades, because the Dark Light being maxed out becomes so excessive, I'm wondering why not make it infinite at that point. And the later levels of the Poltergust don't really come into play until you get to the last bits of the game. Even though I'm not super big on the upgrades, I do like how you obtain them, as they're the new motivating factor to grab lots of money. Back in the first game, money was more of a superfluous thing. The more you got, the better rank you received at the end. It wasn't crazy, but it worked well with how short the game was, and I still always try to get the highest rank I can whenever I play it. Dark Moon gives money a more practical application. You collect it now to get more upgrades, which makes grabbing it more inherently satisfying than it was in the first game, which is also helped by how you actually go about getting it. Before, you mainly rummaged around cabinets and stuff for money, but that was mostly inconsequential because the big bucks came from Portrait Ghost pearls and gems that required some special tasks, and a whole lot of plant watering. Dark Moon is now entirely focused on the money. Gems have taken on a new purpose. Each of the 5 mansions you go to has their own set. Collect all in a set and you get a statue of Luigi, so now it's something you only do if you really feel like doing it. The way you go about grabbing money is different too. You can still search through cabinets, but you're gonna get next to nothing by only doing that. Instead, it's more about interacting with the environment, solving these mini puzzles that it's possible you can just walk past. Doing stuff like flashing obscure lights, spinning well-disguised fans, using the Dark Light on some paintings, or even doing more level-specific things like launching toads into small passageways. It makes taking time to smell the roses and missions more rewarding. Without this, you'd be blowing through each room without much thought. And I love how most of the time when it gives you money, you don't just have it pop out like in the first game, you get a torrent of money rain down upon you. Forget going through grandma's china cupboard for gems, now I'm busting down walls if it means getting a dig at that inheritance. It counteracts my problem of the upgrades being a little unrewarding because the process of getting money is inherently fun for me. While that's all well and good, the structure of the game has seen the most changes, and from what I understand is the most contentious part of the game. Instead of one fairly large interconnecting mansion that you explore over the course of the game, there's instead 5 smaller mansions that you clear out in a mission-based structure. Basically, each mansion in this game is like your typical Mario world, with 5 stages and a boss usually, but we'll get there. Now, in theory, I can see this system working out fine. The mansion in the first game was already split into multiple areas that were bookended by a boss fight. There was the entrance area, main floor, upstairs, and you finished off with the 3rd floor in the basement at the same time. If each mansion's missions had you cover a different part of the area in this fashion, it wouldn't be that bad, and they do it sometimes, but most of the game just squanders this completely. The first mansion is a perfect example of the bad side, which isn't helped by most of the missions here making you go places just to get a new part of your arsenal. You don't get fully equipped with the essentials until after the 4th level, which really makes this feel like the tutorial mansion and leaves a pretty bad first impression. You spend so much time running through areas you've already been so you can get to 1 or 2 new rooms for that mission. The first mansion is not large enough to justify this mission structure, so you end up doing so much back and forth it gets exhausting. The last mission really drives it home because it's literally combing through the entire place to remove spider webs. Theoretically, this would be fun as a final challenge, making making you re-explore the entire mansion with your completed set and finding inventive ways to start fires to clear out the large spider webs. It all sounds fun, and it kinda is, but it's overshadowed by the fact that I've already been to most of these rooms several times over, so it's very draining. But man, you want to talk about draining? Okay, so EGAD gives you this little DS for your adventure. It's like the Game Boy from the last game and acts again as your map. It was originally on the bottom screen of the 3DS, but on Switch it's up in the corner, which I thought would have gotten annoying, but it's pretty good at fading out when I wouldn't want to be looking at it, even if it is a bit more cumbersome if you want to scroll around the map now. Alright Hyper, do maps really piss you off that much? No, that's not the problem. What I take issue with is that EGAD calls you on the thing constantly. Most of the time it's super obvious stuff too, all it does is bog down the pace having a stop and mash through dialogue that's repeating information at you. What really gets me is that most of what you're told is where to go or something that happened literally right in front of you, and it's like, guys, you already told us where to go before we entered the level, the map tells me specifically what rooms to search, and if something about that changes, I'm gonna see it happen. It particularly makes this first mansion a slog because of how short the missions are, but it doesn't let up for the entire game. From start to finish, it's stop and go, which makes the game feel like it goes on for twice as long as it actually does. Oh, and speaking of missions changing, in comes my second least favorite part of the game, the retread missions. No, I don't mean having to run back through rooms because I just talked about that. I mean A-2, let's use the first case as an example. You get sent in here to open the back parts of the mansion by using this gear mechanism. Get in, go over the gears, the ghost stole all of the gears, okay? Now you go around grabbing all the ghosts that stole your stuff, and once that's done, A-3 has you doing what you were gonna do in A-2 before the padding demon struck. Every mansion, except for the final one, has at least one of these types of missions. The fourth mansion at least has the decency and not make its actual mission and its padding take up 2 separate levels, but that's made up for with this place having barely anything to do. The only silver lining of this is that a couple times it happens, you get your stuff stolen by a polterpup, which makes you track him through the mansion using the dark light, which at least puts a new spin on things and makes for a fun little challenge, even if I wish it was replaced by something with less reuse. It's definitely a lot better than having your important items be nabbed by some random jagoff that you just dump in your vacuum and call it a day. While I'm complaining, let me talk about that fourth mansion, cause man, what a missed opportunity. I'll get more into this when I start being positive again, but this probably could have been one of my favorite mansions, but they only had 3 main levels instead of the standard 5. Why? Come on, guys. It really feels like they stopped caring about this one towards the end because the final mission is another round of recovering stolen goods, and once you do that, you do what you originally came to get done, and the mission wraps up like 3 minutes after that. Then you get to the boss, there's no lead up to it like there is for most of the other ones, and once you start it, it's some lame turret section you gotta do 3 times, even though I'm pretty confident nothing even changes on all 3 rounds. Like, what happened here? Last thing up, because I've been going for a bit now, but on the topic of time frames and finishing off the problems I have with how missions are handled, I feel like the obvious reasoning for the mission structure is due to the 3DS being a handheld, and pop-in, pop-out gameplay works better for that. I feel like that tracks for the first couple mansions where missions go for like 10 to 15 minutes, but once you pass the halfway point, missions start taking around half an hour, hell, sometimes more. It gets pretty excessive, and coupled with the other problems regarding pacing I mentioned earlier, some sessions when I played this game I only get through 1 level because that's all I could digest at the moment. Okay, after all that ranting, you might think that I kinda hate this game, but no, I actually had fun for most of my playthrough, and there's a couple things I think Dark Moon actually did better than the first one. Even though the combat at its core has been simplified, there's actually more diversity because of the better use they get out of the ghosts. There's more types to start. The green, red, and purple ghosts fill the same role as the orange, blue, and grabbing ghosts, but these purple bastards are way better at breaking your suckage, which makes them priority number 1 whenever they're around. The yellow ghosts are pretty similar to the garbage ghosts, but they're harder to deal with because they stay in place and shoot at you while you're sucking. I'm not rewriting that. So you have to be pretty careful with your movement to not break the pull. There's new blue guys that hide in furniture and throw stuff at you until they're dealt with, which is fun in combination with other ghosts, but the late game uses a bit too many at once and it gets a little annoying. The green guys show up in all sorts of forms, grabbing stuff around the room to give them new attack patterns you have to work around or prevent you from flashing them until you do something. They can also have environment-specific transformations with the tornadoes, mummies and knights. The mummies and knights are really fun to deal with because when you first fight them, you have to figure out how to even make them vulnerable. And once you do, they start throwing them at you in conjunction with the normal ghosts, which makes for a sometimes hard to manage balance, but finding that balance is really fun. Once you get to Mansion 4, the ghosts start getting infused with these crystals that make them more aggressive and increase their health. And I actually really like this. It keeps the ghost variety intact while still upping the difficulty the closer you get to the end. In the original, not only were the same pool of ghosts used throughout the entire game with only slight elemental disruptions to shake things up, but some types, namely the orange and the pink, saw less use the further you got in favor of the big blue guys. On top of the health increase, they also start getting barriers that require a certain charge level of break, which prioritizes you holding on to ghosts for long periods of time instead of slowly wiggling them down. Really, the only area where the ghost variety falls short is the lack of portrait ghosts. Portrait ghosts did wonders for Luigi's Mansion, making for small, albeit sometimes too simple puzzles to capture them, and helping in characterizing the mansion as a whole. A lot of rooms in this game I probably wouldn't remember if not for the portrait ghost in them, like the ceramic studio is kind of a nothing room, but I still remember it because you fight the funny jar guy here. Their mannerisms and small descriptions added so much personality to the entire game, and Dark Moon just doesn't really have that. The closest we get to mini-bosses are these big brain ghosts that sometimes show up, and even though they are better at being bosses than the portrait ghosts are, they just don't hit the same. It could be any ghost in this fight and nothing much would change. They do pick up the slack regarding personality in one big area though, and thankfully it's with the guy you're staring at the whole game. Luigi was another big contributor to the personality of the original, his voice lines, exaggerated animations, and especially his little blurbs on random items around the place. It made him into who he is now. Dark Moon doesn't have the ability to see Luigi's thoughts on things, but now they go way harder in how he expresses himself in cutscenes, and I actually like that a lot. He's so fun to watch that I never really wanted to skip the cutscenes, even if nothing that crazy or important is going on. It helps that in the original they were laying Luigi's groundwork down, so he was a lot more low-key, but Dark Moon came so long after that that they knew what they wanted out of him now. So there's a lot more of him just doing things. Definitely one of the best parts of the game for me. Going back to gameplay though, I think the mansion's layouts are all really good, even if the way those layouts were used could have been improved. The first one is pretty standard, but the rest each do unique things, which is cool. The second mansion focuses on interacting with the plants around you, and finding ways to fill water buckets for a multitude of puzzles. Some plants can be used as projectiles to deal with these Venus flytrap guys, others let you float around and collect money, and some even let you advance to new rooms. They also introduced these toad missions here, with the whole setup being there's a portal near the start of the level and you need to navigate through rooms to find him and then get him back to the screen to send him home. It's an escort mission pretty much, but I feel like there's a stigma against that term that wouldn't really fit here, because I actually found these to be some of my favorite missions in the game. Toad generally keeps himself out of trouble, he can't be killed by ghosts and does a good job of following you, and whenever you need him to start paying attention, a quick flash does the trick. The puzzles get creative with him too, as the toads you find usually don't like water, and Mansion 4 there's ice that breaks if both of you walk on it. And there's this poor sap who's in the clock area, and get this, he is scared of clocks. There's a lot of these sections where you have to launch them to different places to get around, which helps give these missions a different feel from the others. It makes dragging him around feel less like a hindrance and more like a nice little gimmick. It also introduces the Polterpup missions, which I am very split on. On one hand, I think it's kinda fun. The dog took something from you, and now you gotta chase him down using the dark light, which gets pretty silly when he starts running on the walls and ceilings. I say I'm split on it because I like tracking him through the mansion, doing some in-between fights before finally catching him, but it kinda exacerbates the redundancy problem because these usually come right at the end of a mansion and have you running through the same rooms again. It makes it feel like they were gonna be one mission short and figured the easiest thing to do was give you an excuse to run through everything again without much changing, but with that being said, on their own, yeah, I enjoy them. The third mansion is where the game starts getting a lot more enjoyable, mainly because the puzzles start playing hardball and get more interesting. I like these bits the game started doing where you have to look through these peepholes to see something in an adjacent room to complete something on your side. Usually the game just uses this to see what the ghosts are up to, and it still does after this, but I thought it was a neat way of observing your environment and doing something with the information you gain. They also start getting use out of these bomb guys. They remain stationary, but when you flash them, they count down and explode. One of the puzzles that always comes to mind for me is moving these lifts by putting some on and then blowing them up. It was a more unconventional way of using an explosion mechanic, and I thought it was neat. The fourth mansion, if you want to know about my major disappointment here I mentioned earlier, it's because I was actually really enjoying my time, especially since the first two missions have you going to different areas, which keeps things fresh. And I really enjoyed a lot of the fire puzzles for melting ice and whatnot. It reminded me of using the elements in the first game, but required more thinking thinking. It was cool. They also got some better use out of the dark light in this mansion. There were a couple times where you gotta look at the reflection in the ice and figure out what objects are missing, which is definitely more interesting than using it on paintings over and over. You also start making use of these teleporters, which initially are pretty simple, but when you start moving items between rooms using them, that's when things get really fun. The last mansion is easily my favorite, mainly because it actually has you going to different areas in most missions, starting in the basement, moving to the first floor, then the second, and the last one has you clearing out all the floors of ghosts. I think the second mission was probably my favorite. The floor has 4 themed rooms based on the previous mansions, each with a teleporter leading back to the main room. Initially, I was like, okay, it's a bit of a walk between each room, this is just an easy way of connecting them all, but no. It's actually set up this way because you take items between each of the rooms to open the way to the Toad painting so you can rescue them. Probably up there is one of my favorite missions. The puzzles involving taking objects from room to room were some of the best in the game. The last mission was also an event, Paranormal Chaos, the only mission name I can actually remember. You have to deal with large swarms of ghosts, and if you take too long to clear out certain rooms, it's an instant loss. The end even throws a timer your way to get everything cleaned up. This is the only mission where I almost died. Yeah, close but no cigar. Mainly cause right at the end I kept trying to break the pumpkins for hearts, but you actually get those from the watermelons, a common mistake. On that note, yeah, I didn't die once in this game, which is funny because you collect these golden bones that give you extra lives, but I never use them. It's weird because especially towards the end, I don't think the game is too easy. I guess I just always had enough hearts. Now, there's one part to all the mansions that the first game did pretty good that Dark Moon kind of drops the ball on, that being the atmosphere. I really like the atmosphere of the original game. Everything was dark, the slightly twisty scenery and decor of the rooms, the dark color palette used, that progressively got more ghostly green the closer you were to the final boss, and the electricity of the music and sound effects. Dark Moon comparatively doesn't really hit the same. I feel like the rooms are too bright. There are several rooms in the first game that are darker with the lights on than most are with the lights off in 2. As such, all the mansions lose the mystery and slight intimidation of the one mansion previously. The final mansion is probably the closest it got, but it still loses out because it just isn't dark enough. The general sound of this game also doesn't do it for me. Most of the electronic instruments got swapped out for strings, which takes away a lot of the identity from before. The electricity of sound effects and music in the original served a double purpose, giving bosses these chaotic themes that made them more imposing than they would have been otherwise, while also making doing things as mundane as grabbing keys satisfying. Meanwhile, the strings in Dark Moon makes everything in the game feel pretty flaccid. Yeah, let's run with the sucking theme. The music didn't really stick with me as much. I mostly remember the mansion themes, and that's about it. And other sound effects don't pack that same punch, which was a bit disappointing for me. Let's get to wrapping up gameplay with the bosses. The first one is most people's favorite for good reason. It's this giant puzzle where you have to keep guiding the fire to the big web the spider's sitting on. It set a cool precedent for how the game could make puzzle bosses that the rest did not follow at all. The second boss is lame on its own, a pretty bog standard dodge attack, counter attack, repeat for 3 hits, but I wouldn't have that much animosity for it if not for this actually awful climb up to it. It's essentially a maze. Each layer, one of the 3 stair sets, lets you go up. The rest flush you down and make you fight some ghosts, and each time you get pushed down, it shows you for a little bit what the correct path is. You're more than likely gonna fall at least like 4 times, and each one of those times you have to run up this giant staircase just to fall down again. Like, oh my god, who thought this was a good idea? Mansion 3, they ran out of ideas, I guess. It's just some enemy rush. Like, okay, dude, you can do better than that. This is like the laziest and most uninspired boss trope you could have gone with. I'm not even gonna give Mansion 4's boss the satisfaction of talking about how bad it is again, and then we come to the final mansion, which surprisingly has 2 bosses, both being pretty good. I like the first one most, a rematch with Boolossus. You launch him into the train to separate him and then throw the boos comprising him into the train cars, which was pretty fun and got hard to aim properly during the last few. Definitely a lot better than his fight from the first game. I like how they still have the fight get harder, less boos you have to capture, without making it needlessly aggravating like the original. Last is this night boss that I kinda like, but I wish there was a bit more to it. You start with dealing with the normal knights, and you have to deal with more than you have previously, but you've still dealt with them before. I like the last phase though with the giant knight. I thought dodging his attacks while sucking up the carpets was good, but this is the last part of the fight, so it feels like it ends right as it's getting good. I guess that just leaves the final boss now, so let's start getting into that. Even though it's obvious that, yeah, Luigi's Mansion game, of course the game ends with King Boo, they really build up to him, which was kinda cool. You find out Mario got trapped in a painting again around the second mansion, and every so often EGAD lets you look around a picture one of his cameras took, and you'll end up seeing these giant shadows of King Boo lurking around. The last picture even gives you a King Boo jump scare, safe to say my pants are pissed. On the last mission, you get beamed back as usual, but midway through the king drags you into his little final boss arena. Yeah, that's all this place is. This boss is neat, probably one of the better ones here, but it just doesn't live up to how great the first game's was. I like these little chase sections, but actually fighting him is pretty simple. Just run him below the spike balls and start sucking. There's larger spike balls you can get him under, but for some reason it doesn't help you any more than the normal size ones. Interesting. We put King Boo back in the vacuum where he belongs. The Dark Moon is fixed, so Egad can have his free labor back. We get a nice moment between the brothers, and the game closes with Luigi getting a new dog he's afraid of. With the game closed out, what's left? Well, we have this little collection area where you can see all the ghosts you've gotten, money you've collected, your gem statues, and your container where you unethically shove all the booze together. Oh, that's right, the booze. You know, the main ghosts of the Mario series? Yeah, almost forgot about them. They are drastically less important here. There's one in each mission, hidden inside an invisible object you gotta seek out. Catching them is way more enjoyable here. Now you hold the dark light on them, grab onto their tongue, and send them flying, which is honestly pretty funny. I tried looking for them while I was going through the game, but I found them pretty hard to find actually, but that doesn't matter because surprisingly, you only need to catch like 2 of these things. For getting all of them in a mansion, you get this last extra mission that's usually pretty simple. It's neat, I guess, but I didn't feel like doing it to be completely real. Last is the ScareScraper. It's the game's multiplayer mode where you and some friends, or just you if you're like me, go through several floors doing different stuff depending on the game mode, be it grabbing ghosts, finding the exit, or catching Polterpup. It gets a bit repetitive and is definitely gonna be better with more people, but I had fun with it. You can even catch these reskins of the standard ghosts here. I remember back in the day trying to get all of these, but it's random which you get and if you get repeats, so I wouldn't recommend trying that. So, that was Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon. Yeah, it's fine. I don't know, it's that an anticlimactic note to end on? I feel like it is. I can't say I hated my time through this game, but it also has a decent amount of problems that drag it down. I mostly enjoyed playing it, but in a way I can definitely feel that this is a transitional game from 1 to 3. It has a lot of cool ideas, but they need lots of refining. I'm looking forward to eventually tackling Luigi's Mansion 3 whenever that will happen. Definitely not 3 years from now, I know that for sure. But with that, I hope you enjoyed the video. Happy Halloween to everyone, and I'll see you all later.